Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. We are excited about today's presentation featuring experts Jonathan Langer, Dennis Fridrich, and Tom Beaver. The panelists will discuss how one of the largest and busiest hospitals and health systems in the United States is working with TRIMEDX and Medigate to create a scalable, security-integrated asset management platform. Webinar Wednesday would like to thank our sponsor, Medigate. Medigate's comprehensive and accurate device discovery capabilities, combined with clinical contextual anomaly detection, enables automated, rule-based, clinically driven security policies that keep clinical networks and patients safe. For more information, please visit medigate.io. A few announcements before we get started. Please join us for continuing education, networking, and vendor engagement opportunities at our HTM mixers over the next few months. We will be in Milwaukee on July 14th and 15th, and in Kansas City on September 9th and 10th. Please visit htmmixer.com for more details, registration, and for our steps to a safe and clean meeting environment. While you're there, please make sure to sign up for our newsletter so you'll always have the most up-to-date information. Let's give one lucky attendee the opportunity to win one of our Webinar Wednesday t-shirts by answering the following question. In what city and state are Medigate's sales headquarters located? You can find the answer by visiting our sponsor's website. Please use the questions feature in the GoToWebinar dashboard to submit your answer. As always, today's webinar is eligible for one continuing education credit from the ACI. You can obtain your certificate by completing the post-webinar survey. More details on this at the end of today's webinar. We'll wrap up today's presentation with a live Q&A. You can submit your questions anytime during the webinar by using the questions feature on the GoToWebinar dashboard. We will get through as many questions as time allows. As I mentioned earlier, our speakers today are Jonathan Langer, Tom Beaver, and Dennis Fridrich. Dennis, you may begin whenever you are ready.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Yeah, it's a pretty exciting webinar to be a part of, to listen to Tom Beaver, the CISO and Executive Director of one of our partner health systems, discuss how the solutions of TRIMEDX and Medigate have assisted him with his roles and responsibilities. As you can see on the screen, Jonathan Langer, he's the CEO and founder of Medigate. Tom Beaver, as I said, he's the CISO and Executive Director of one of our partner health systems. And myself, Dennis Friedrich, the VP of Information and Security for TRIMEDX.
Okay, so I'm Tom, and I'll go ahead and kick us off with starting with what problems are we trying to solve, right? Everything comes back to a business problem, not a technology problem. The problems we were trying to solve were better visibility of our clinical devices and medical device connected to our network, and how to manage those through a full lifecycle management program. We didn't have very good visibility into our medical devices. Trying to have a live inventory of them was dependent on manual processes, people keeping physical track of devices. And in a large, very busy hospital, particularly with medical devices and IoT devices, they tend to fly around quite a bit. So it was a mess, to be quite honest. So what we decided to do was, because this is such a targeted environment from bad actors, we needed to get a better picture of where we are in the life cycle of our medical devices and clinical devices, and what their security posture is on anything connected to our network. So we worked in partnership with TRIMEDX. They brought to us the Medigate tool as part of a larger program that would give us visibility into the status of our devices and in real time. But the thing is, if you have that information but you don't do anything with it, you're actually in a bigger problem than you are by not even knowing it. So that's the problems we were trying to solve, and that's where we brought, between the combination of Medigate and TRIMEDX, we took the next logical step. Next slide. Okay, so lack of visibility into our device inventory. Again, we really didn't know what we had. Yes, we were running our vulnerability scans, whether it was Qualys or Tenable or anything else, and all we'd really get was a bunch of data saying, yes, these things are vulnerable. But trying to track down and get people to identify what all the devices are just based on IP address or MAC address just wasn't getting done. As with most health systems, I'm sure most folks run very lean. There aren't people sitting on the bench looking for more paperwork to do, and until it becomes a crisis, they're not going to solve it. So what we wanted to do was get information on what devices are plugged into our network and what are those devices, and preferably where are they. The next thing was, so what's the health of these devices? Now that we know what's plugged in and where, how healthy is it? How vulnerable is it? Where is it in its life cycle? Patching, everything else. And then obviously challenges with audit. We had a medical device audit about a year ago, and as clinical devices and medical devices are plugged into the network, they become more IT-esque, if you will, and need to behave and adhere to IT type policies. While there's still some gap there, we needed to formalize that and make it a much more efficient process, an automated process. Okay, next slide. So first and foremost, and how we got here was we basically, working with TRIMEDX, they brought this program to us to discuss. And for those of us who have been in the industry for a long time, the very first thing, oh great, another tool, what's it really going to do? So we did a proof of concept. It was very straightforward. We set it up with very little interface and help from the local IT staff. Put the appliance on our network and started collecting data. Once we started seeing that, and to me, that's the best way to get this information. I'm not dependent on people telling me what devices they think are plugged in or what their physical inventory looks like. And yes, these devices, I think I deployed them to the ED last week, so they should be there. We don't need to go through that anymore. It's all available to us through the Medigate tool. I've actually got it running in background now, so I can kind of refer to it as we go through these slides, and in case any questions come up, because it's that real world information. Real-time information. We can tell what the health of the devices is. As I look at it, I can see what the vulnerability status is of all the devices, where they are in their patch cycles, and we will actually interface with an asset management tool that TRIMEDX uses, so we can track them through work orders and remediation. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so first of all, and our audit support, yes, being able to show our auditors we had the Medigate tool in place in the proof of concept stage when the audit came in. There was a whole lot of excitement about it, and they felt that it really helped us take a large step forward to meeting our compliance requirements. And not only compliance, I'm also a big fan of focusing on operational, knowing that if you do your operational stuff correctly, you'll meet your compliance requirements. We have a single pane of glass, so I can see all the clinical devices, what their life cycle status is, what their vulnerability status is, and where we need to prioritize based on vulnerability and criticality. This is much more real time than your traditional vulnerability scanning tools like Tenable or Qualys or Nessus or any of those. This is real time data. Gains in operational efficiency, obviously. We're not guessing anymore. We know where these devices are plugged in. We know what network they're on. We actually had a real world scenario where a lab machine was infected with a malware, and our SIEM detected it through using Medigate, and TRIMEDX team were immediately able to go directly to that device, unplug it, and then start doing forensics on it. We would not have been able to do that without having the Medigate tool live. Improved IT and CE, yeah, obviously. Clinical engineering and IT don't always work hand in hand. Sometimes it's more hand and foot. But as we start sharing these tools and seeing through a single pane of glass, if you will, we're looking at the same information and can then target resources. Who's going to take care of what? And that example I just gave of having finding malware on a lab device, IT and clinical engineering work together on that because they got the same information through the different tools, and we're able to track it down and immediately react. Okay, next slide, please. Jonathan, I think this is you.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you for that detailed account of using our service. I want to touch on the points that Tom mentioned from an organizational perspective. As Tom indicated, in order to successfully accommodate security use cases, device lifecycle management use cases, and certainly operational efficiency use cases, we got to foster collaboration between the multiple stakeholders that are involved in these types of use cases. So just to name a few, IT and information security obviously own the network and overall security of the network and the various connected assets. Clinical engineering, who own the medical devices and are stakeholders with regard to the security and lifecycle management of the device. And various operational users, whether they're financial operators who need to make better decisions with regard to procurement or allocation of devices across the enterprise, or basically clinicians that need to use the assets and want to maximize availability and usability of the devices. In order for us to be successful in the various use cases, what I've seen is that when the stakeholders work together, obviously the outcomes are better. A good example, I think, is, and one that actually Tom gave a couple moments ago, is the patching use case. So obviously security is going to identify vulnerabilities relating, let's say, to a medical device that they want remediated. The way for that to happen is for a team to reach out to a security team to reach out to clinical engineering and say, hey, is there an available patch? Is there something that we can do in order to remediate? And they would in turn reach out to the OEM or within their internal databases. TRIMEDX, of course, in this case, would handle that. And then, of course, the operational users are going to want an efficient process with minimal downtime. Again, just to demonstrate, in order to be successful in this very basic and kind of day-to-day use case of patching, we need a tool, a process, a procedure that brings these stakeholders closer together. And that's what we're trying to achieve within this program that Tom mentioned. Let's go one slide forward, please. In my eyes, the way to actually bring the stakeholders together, the foundation for that is by harnessing the power of meaningful data. That's basically curated based on the identity of the stakeholders that are involved. Meaning, while IT or information security are going to want to see some things and some analytics relating to their areas of ownership, clinical engineering may want to see other things, and operational users may want to see a different set of analytics. But there's a common denominator, a common language that needs to be available for everyone in order for them to be on the same page. And that relies on data and on on data that you can trust, on that single pane of glass that we keep talking about. In order for the data to serve its purpose, in my eyes, there can be no compromises as it relates to data fidelity and the clinical context of the data. So starting with data fidelity, device discovery is key. When Tom uses the devices and has that dashboard open, he has to be able to trust, and the various teams that work in Tom's organization have to trust the data and know that it is true. Otherwise, it just won't be usable. And therefore, various technological techniques need to be employed in order to ensure that, whether it's a deep packet inspection or AI or any other one of those things. I don't want to dive deep into that on today's webinar, but that is key. The other piece that is also highly important is device utilization. If we're going to go into clinical operational efficiency use cases so that we can really achieve ROI, we'll talk about that a little bit later in this presentation. The ability to extract device utilization metrics from the network or from other information systems is crucial. When talking about the clinical context, which I think is also an imperative, one thing to look at is risk and threat analytics. We have to look at the external ecosystem in which we're operating and learn from what's happening globally. So whether it's consuming data feeds from AMI or FDA or various manufacturers and so on and so forth, understanding the context of the industry in which we work in my eyes, is highly significant in order to determine risk and in order to understand or anticipate what's coming. One other thing within the clinical context that I want to underscore is communication or behavioral profiles. In some cases, we're going to have to take or to use compensating controls, typically on the network level, in order to reduce risk where remediation or patching is just not available. And that's a common thing. I'm sure most people on the call have encountered this before. But in order to take action on the network, it's key that we understand clinical workflows and build security policies around them. Otherwise, there may be unfortunate cases of disruption of clinical workflow. And that is, of course, something that cannot happen within this mission critical environment that we all work in. So again, understanding the clinical context through the communications or the behavioral profiles of the devices, I believe is an imperative when we talk about the data itself. So that's the foundation. This is the fuel that operates the entire system. Go ahead. One more slide, please. Now, Tom talked about the ecosystem before, or the overall network. I think that going back to the discussion about the silos and about how we shut down those silos and foster a converged or collaborative environment, I think the way to do that is through allowing meaningful and integrated workflows. And when I talk about meaningful and integrated workflows, again, we got to consider all the various tools that are used by different stakeholders, whether it's security, whether it's IT, whether it's clinical engineering. And one of the things that we do when we formulate a program through the Medigate tool is make sure that those integrations are in place. So we're looking holistically at the processes that we need to streamline and accommodate. So of course, a good example here on this for this webinar, given the fact that we're working closely with in partnership with TRIMEDX, is the integrations with the various TRIMEDX information systems that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, RSQ and others. And with TRIMEDX, I would even say that it goes beyond just the workflow integration through the various information system integrations, but it also goes to the ability to deliver services through boots on the ground. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of special within this program, where we're able to identify a vulnerability or some sort of incident, just like one of the incidents that maybe Tom mentioned earlier, the ability to create an automated workflow that then results in a ticket that that TRIMEDX personnel can go ahead and shut down or remediate. I think that is of the utmost importance. But the key thing here is when you look at this program is think about it holistically. Think about the overall ecosystem. Go ahead, Dennis, one more, please. Lastly is operational efficiency, and basically how can we extract a ROI from such a program. The way that I like to look at this is really looking at again, going back to the stakeholder discussion. So whether it's clinical engineering that's looking maybe about how to improve technician dispatch, whether it's InfoSec that's looking to prioritize its efforts, or business leaders that are looking to make the right decisions with regard to procurement, there is ROI to be obtained. And if you could go one more slide, I'd like to give a couple of examples of how I see that. Thank you. So good example with the lifecycle management. When we look at the clinical engineering side of the house, really it's about being able to find devices in real time, accurately. And there's some examples down there on how we do that, but basically harnessing the data in order to find the device quickly, to patch it, to maintain it, to do whatever you need to do with it, to manage an inventory in real time. That's ultimately going to result in ROI, because we're not wasting our time in documentation or reconciling old inventories, but we're just going straight to the business, and that's handling the device itself. From an InfoSec perspective, prioritizing control applications, I think that's key. Being able to have in real time an understanding of all the risks in my environment so that I can make the right decisions that'll have the most impact in terms of reducing risk. That's also ROI in my eyes. So understanding what is the right patch that I need to do right now, where should my attention be from a security standpoint based on clinical risk. That's what we're trying to achieve here with regard to the overall business case. Lastly, with regard to the financial operators here, I'll take the example of purchasing. This goes to the utilization metrics that I was mentioning earlier as one of the foundations of the data. If we're able to gather these utilization metrics and present them in a meaningful way, ultimately we'll be able to use real data in order to make decisions rather than just kind of use our intuition. And when we use the data itself, what we're seeing in various cases is that ultimately we'll be able to procure less devices and then basically achieving ROI in that case. The key I guess, point that I wanted to make here is that no matter which stakeholder you are in the overall enterprise, if you're using automation and if you're using this type of approach when it comes to security, IT, clinical engineering, or financial operators, there is ROI that you can extract from the various aspects of the program that might make sense to underscore for leadership. Thank you very much. I'll pass it back to Dennis.
Thanks, Jonathan. And and also, I would say this is that we're going to look at the TRIMEDX as comprehensive cyber solution, but really before I dive into the slide, I just want to echo a lot of things that Tom and Jonathan have said. Right, this is data driven. This is about solving first and foremost a business problem, and I want to reiterate the business problem in a different sense of saying from TRIMEDX, right? We view the business problem as with the number of connected medical devices increasing, higher levels of threat of cybersecurity, right? The business problem we're solving for ultimately is patient safety, continuum of care, and the health system's reputation. So in TRIMEDX, when we look at those three attributes of the business case that we're solving for here with our cyber solution, we first took a step and interviewed over 100 healthcare executives, and the majority of those executives said the biggest solution that we can provide in the cybersecurity space is to have real-time monitoring. And we said, wow, that's great, because we have this relationship with Medigate. And so that's the first on the top left-hand picture, that is real-time monitoring, right? That is our solution with Medigate. They provide that lens, as Jonathan was describing, for all their different techniques that they have. And that's giving us the data. It's giving us the lens to the inventory that Tom was talking about earlier. And that's the genesis of the start of the program. And then if we move counterclockwise down to the medical device intelligence, right? This is a dedicated team we have within TRIMEDX that is evaluating patches. They're ensuring that they're validated from the OEM. They're issuing the remediation work orders that Jonathan was talking about, like boots on the ground people. They're looking at the FDA alerts and recall. And they're also looking through all the vulnerabilities that are out there and acting on them. And then if we continue across the bottom, looking at the quality and cyber and quality teams, right? They're working with our healthcare partners and assessing their environment, helping them with pre-assessment risk assessments of devices, They're assisting with the implementation of cyber remediation work orders. But one of the better things that's come out of this as well, and Tom was talking about this earlier, and Jonathan just mentioned it as well, it's the collaboration that we're really starting to see between our CE and our IT teams to really ensure that the risk posture of the medical devices is as secure as possible. So it's a really great outcome that we're starting to see on that side where we have our advanced programs implemented. And then if we focus on the center of the picture here, you'll see the risk score. So that's a proprietary risk score that TRIMEDX calculates, and it takes in a number of factors. One of them is that we just have over 2 million pieces of equipment in the ecosystem. We can look at all of our work order history. We can see what kind of work has been done on the devices, and we start to calculate that in there. So for us, when we look at the critical areas of security, we're looking at our device profiles, we're looking at our device behavior, and then any patient safety that's occurred on any of these device types there. So I would just say though, in sum on this slide is that in the combination of real-time monitoring, our medical device intelligence and cyber quality teams, they're all contributing as one big broad team to deliver TRIMEDX's comprehensive cyber solution. In a different sense, I'd like to finish by saying this. We like to say that we're monitoring, we're real-time monitoring, alerting, detecting, and responding to threats to improve the security posture of the healthcare systems. But most importantly, we want to ensure patient safety. So with that, I'm going to pass this back to Tom to talk about some keys to success.
Great, thank you. So we're well on our way into the integration with Medigate and the TRIMEDX Cyber Advanced. Some of the things we've learned that are really important, starting with, and most importantly, is the collaborative engagement with clinical engineering and IT. Without that, there's no point in even doing this. Now, the benefit of the tool is because it is purely objective and is reading data on the wire, you're less dependent on providing each other information, more dependent on interpreting what the tool is telling us and taking that information and acting on it. The high-level inventory and vulnerability management of the tool is the reason we got it. So the reason we're willing to spend the money for it, because that is absolutely crucial at a safety net hospital like ours. It's a very fast paced. You never know where you're going to need another medical device, and you need to deploy it quickly for trauma or anything else. And you need to know what your inventory is and where all that equipment is and what's working and what's not. And then lastly is the single pane of glass, giving us the granular view. We can tell what the devices are talking to specifically, whether it's in a matrix format or several different formats. We can tell what devices are talking to what off of our network very clearly, and all through a single front-end dashboard that we just drill down into. This is something that the IT staff has found very helpful, and in all fairness, I know Medigate is a medical device clinical engineering focused tool, but it's a long ways ahead of a lot of other tools that are more traditionally IT. So the information we're getting from it is exceptional. Excuse me. Next slide, please. So next steps. We are at the beginning of the Cyber Advanced journey. We have seen great benefit. TRIMEDX has worked with us very closely through the proof of concept, so we could, try what we're buying ahead of time, and that's why we bought it, is because it was something we found great value in. We will be using the information given to us by Medigate to create basically a security operations center for the clinical devices and integrate that more closely with our logarithm seam, and also our improvement to our network admission control on the wired network. And again, the data provided to us by this tool is integral to that. Once the full integration is complete, we're just going to keep polishing the stone and seeing what we can get from it. I think there's a lot of capability to the tool, particularly when interfaced to the TRIMEDX clinical asset management system. And through the combination of those two tools, we will just constantly be looking for continuous improvement and gain efficiencies across both clinical engineering and IT. That's it. Next.
Thank you all so much for this presentation. As a reminder to our audience, if you do have any questions, please use the questions feature on your GoToWebinar dashboard. We do have a few that have come in already, so we will start with those. Our first question is for Tom. When you evaluated Medigate, what were your KPIs, both in terms of capabilities native to Medigate and its integration with TRIMEDX?
Sure. First and foremost was auto discovery, right? We didn't want to have to do a lot of manual configuration. It was really about, okay, let's put an appliance on our network and find out what we've got. Anyone who's gotten tools that, you know, I go back a long, long way to where you had to hire 3 FTEs just to manage the tool. You know, those days are long past us. So we needed hard objective data from the tool immediately that we could act on. Minimize the maintenance of the tool, right? So we're not hiring anybody to take care of it. We need the tool to be helping us, not for us to have to do a lot of care and feeding for the tool itself. And then realistically, once we had the tool in place, what are we going to be able to act on? Because again, information that I'm not going to be able to act on doesn't do me any good. Now it's even worse because I know that I've got stuff I should act on and I'm not. So it's almost negligent. So those were the 3 big things we were looking for as we went down this path, and just looking for things to get even more involved. Thanks.
All right, the next one is for Jonathan. In terms of Medigate's risk scoring framework, do you support custom weighting that the client can control?
Perfect. So I'll start by saying that one of the things that I've observed in the industry is that when it comes to risk scoring, every healthcare system kind of does it a little bit differently. Everyone adheres to the major risk frameworks that are out there that are obviously the foundation, but in terms of weighting, everyone likes to consider different aspects of that overall framework a little bit differently. One of the things that we've actually added to our platform, which is going to be released in, I think, 2 weeks, is the ability to customize that weighting. Realizing that, again, as I was saying, that different healthcare systems kind of like to do things a little bit differently. That will be something that will be available in the very near future.
Great. Dennis, this one is for you. What data elements from Medigate are integrated into your platform?
Wow, that's a great question. There's a lot. You know, if I take it from an entity level, we're absolutely getting in device-specific attributes, and I can list a few in a moment. We're taking in vulnerability information data sets as well, alert data sets. We're taking in some utilization data to complement our own calculations. But if I go back to device information that we're getting, we're receiving from Medigate through the APIs. Of course, we're receiving a MAC address. Of course, we're receiving an IP address. We're receiving operating system level details. We're receiving VLAN data. We are receiving switch data. I believe port and the switch IP. So there's a lot of rich data that we are getting from Medigate. You know, and if I just drill in a little bit further on like the switch data, for example, when you talk about vector threat, you know, if I know what switch it's on, then we can theoretically look at what's the lateral movement potential of a threat, you know, and try to isolate that down through the tool sets. So it's a rich data set that we are getting in from Medigate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Jonathan, this one is for you. You mentioned operational efficiency and Medigate's capture of device utilization data. From a utilization data development perspective, what are you doing to increase the value of the data and insights provided? Jonathan, I think that you may be muted.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about
Thank
that.
you.
What I was saying is that I think it's a great question because there, I would make a distinction between just being able to see data and to see utilization in general within your environment, but then there's the notion of actionability. And what I'd like to do, and this is where we're spending a lot of our time in, is how do we make the data that we're seeing as it pertains to clinical operational efficiency more actionable in the sense that it's prescribing very concrete recommendations as to how to achieve ROI. So the next step, as far as I'm concerned, and I think again, TRIMEDX has a big part in this given their clinical engineering expertise, is about looking at the data, but analyzing it and then suggesting outcomes, such as let's disposition this device. Let's get rid of this one. We need to buy 2 more of these devices. We need to move the device from location A to location B because that's where our utilization is way too high, and so on and so forth. But the overarching notion or the principle here is that we have to make the data actionable, and that's the next step for us in terms of obtaining this ROI.
Okay. Our next question is, since the partnership was announced and the integrations completed, what have you learned, meaning any surprise areas of value that you had not necessarily contemplated based on your shared client experiences so far?
Maybe one thing that I can jump in and say that at least I've learned, and I think we anticipated this, but I guess there were some surprises. In my eyes, is the importance of tightly tying in or tightly marrying the technical discovery and technical analytics that Medigate is able to do with concrete workflows that TRIMEDX is doing. The tighter that part of the integration is, the more value that can be extracted. Because at the end of the day, as I was saying in reference to the last question that I had, it's about actionability. And if the technology can't deliver action, then we're not doing the best job that we could. And with TRIMEDX, we've learned over and over, and I think we're at a very good spot right now, that the ability to take action through those boots on the ground, through the TRIMEDX workforce, is an absolute imperative.
And Jonathan, that's a great answer. And if I could, let me enhance that with an example that when we turned on the tool, I was surprised by this find, but in retrospect and a lot of thought, I shouldn't have been. And the find was that from the TRIMEDX workflow, when we're doing a PM, we would, if we couldn't find the device, we'd mark the device as CNL, could not locate, but all of a sudden, Medigate saw it. And it was amazing, right? It seems so obvious that it really struck me that, Medigate found a CNL device, the work order is marked as a CNL, and we were then able to look at some of the data attributes that I answered about a little while ago, and work with the IT teams and say, wait, where's that VLAN? Oh, that's the second floor of that building, and we were able to then go get that device and find it, and actually PM it, safely. So that was a great find through the tool. And like I said, in hindsight, shouldn't have been surprised by that nugget of find, but it did surprise me.
All right, our next question is, does this replace an Rtls system?
I think maybe I can jump in with a quick comment, and then I'm glad to hear others, of course, as well. I get this question a lot, actually. Um, what I would say is that it augments. It doesn't necessarily, it won't replace. The reason being is that for some devices are not continuously connected to the network, in which case RTLS is great. You know, you put an RTLS sensor on them, you know where they are at all times. And in other cases, the device is continuously connected, maybe wirelessly, and then the exact location or the approximated location that you can get through access point triangulation and so on is pretty good. The best case, though, and this is going back to the slide that I showed about the overall ecosystem. This is actually a great example. Is I'd love to get my hands on both. I'd love to marry the RTLS data, and that's why we're working on integrations with that. Take the network data and get the best out of both worlds. That would be that's the way that I look at it.
All right, our next question is, what about devices that aren't continuously connected to the network? How do you ensure those devices are also corrected in the event of a security event or vulnerability?
That's another good one. Maybe just quickly chiming in here. I think two answers that I have to that. If a device is kind of jumping on and off the network, which is quite frequent, that happens a lot with infusion pumps and with other types of devices, those transient devices. The window in which it's connected to the network will give you a real-time understanding of what the level of risk and what type of vulnerabilities are on that device at that given point in time. And if it jumps back and forth, then you're in a good spot. In that case, and the network data will give you what you need. If it's a device that's entirely off the network, I think this is where, and this is where we're going with TRIMEDX, is where a strong, tight integration with the RSQ or the CMMS that the customer is using comes into place. Because in that case, if it's a device that's not network connected, I would want the clinical engineer to document the risk of the device or what he's been doing to, or the patch that has been applied or so on. And if that can then come back to Medigate once that device does join the network, having that integration in place will accommodate the use case, even though originally it was not on the network at that point in time. That's the way that I would look at it.
So Jonathan, if I could, let me enhance that a little bit further from the TRIMEDX lens, right? So as an organization in TRIMEDX, we have 4.4 million different devices within our CMMS, unique devices. And so when we look at that, we have a high coverage of all manufacturer models out there that we somehow take care of or have within our CMMS. And so if you have a device that's on and off the network in your environment, that could be fine, but we could have the same make model in another hospital system that's running the program that the vulnerability appears on. And so from a workflow viewpoint, my team will issue projects to our entire to all of our accounts and say, go remediate that make model with this vulnerability patch or this patch for this vulnerability. So by working with TRIMEDX, you're not getting just a single point solution, you're getting an ecosystem solution of all of our accounts. And that's how we can get a little more broad when devices are on and off the network as well.
All right, thank you all. Our next question is, how do you see what the device is currently doing, whether it's connected or not? For example, is your infusion pump delivering chemo or saline?
I'd say that the best way to see what a device is doing at a given point in time, whatever what you're trying to understand what it's doing is, basically it's based on what's going on the wire. The platform itself, the Medigate platform itself, inspects that meticulously. And if you have access to the data using a span or a tap, this way you're able to cover exactly what the device is doing. And more importantly, I would say from a security standpoint, is the clinical workflow that the device is part of right now, is it legitimate? Is it what you would expect? Or is it out of the ordinary, indicating some sort of incident, whether ransomware or otherwise? But the data, again, going back to what I was talking about earlier about the data being key in understanding the clinical workflow in that context, that's key for this to be effective.
Thank you. Our next question is for Tom. Are you hiring new teams of personnel for your clinical SOC?
We are not. That's one of the biggest things we had to do when analyzing the tool, is to stay FTE neutral. Now, as part of this cyber advance, the TRIMEDX cyber advance, they will be providing somebody on site to help us to do the asset management. But ultimately, what we'll do is roll our clinical SOC into our general overall security operations center. There will just be more data fed to it.
All right, our next question is, what vertical can I use Medigate? I'm not sure if this is a complete sentence, so you might have to help me with with a little bit of the understanding. It says, what vertical can I use Medigate? Seems like a good fit for the IoT. What are your thoughts, Jonathan?
I hope I understood the question correctly. Basically, if you want to use Medigate, Medigate is a tool that is that the right vertical to use it for is healthcare. But within healthcare, and I think Tom underscored this previously, it's great for handling medical devices, clinical assets. But we also understand that healthcare systems need to secure their enterprise IoT as well as some of their managed IT assets as well. So Medigate's going to work very well on those as well. We've put a lot of effort into that, trying to be that one-stop shop, so to speak, so they can use one solution. So that can be applied for those types of devices as well. That would be my take on that.
Perfect. Thank you to Dennis, Tom, and Jonathan for all of your time today and for a great presentation. I would like to encourage everyone to visit today's sponsor to learn more about the services they provide to our industry. Please visit medigate.io. A quick reminder that you can obtain your continuing education certificate by completing the post-webinar survey. The survey will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your continuing education credit. You will be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. We will be back soon with another webinar. Please visit our website, webinarwednesday.live, for more details and for complimentary registration. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.